Live-action adaptations of anime, especially in the West, have failed largely to capture the energy or magic that makes the shows they're adapting special. Until very recently, adaptations have a long and heated history of failing, whether or not it's the video game curse or your favorite book that was butchered. And at the top of the list of these unnecessarily bad shows are anime live-action adaptations. So how did we end up in a circumstance where arguably one of the hardest anime to adapt into live-action was made into an outstanding show? My name is Pei, and today we're talking about the surprising triumph of the One Piece live-action adaptation. One Piece is arguably one of the least approachable pieces of media I've ever tried to consume. Whether it's the anime that has over 1,000 episodes or the manga with 1,000 chapters, approaching One Piece is intimidating. It is a staggering mountain of content that feels impossible to catch up with. Yet, if you have an opportunity to sit down with someone who's consumed a good portion of the story, you'll find that their admiration of it is almost cult-like. One Piece tends to hold a very special place in people's hearts. Most who have watched it hold it to an incredibly high standard. I enjoy anime a lot, so much that I even make videos about it online. Yet I still find myself having not watched One Piece in 2023, having given it a couple shots and been exposed to tons of periphery content. Yet despite my love for anime, the overwhelming fan base, and the huge amount of praise and discussion online, the thing that eventually sold me on One Piece was this live-action adaptation. So after finishing the first season of the live-action show, I decided I wanted to make a video about it. I've seen a lot of people who've watched One Piece give their takes on live action, but it's hard for them to separate their expectations given consuming the show or the manga to the live-action adaptation.
Of that, yeah. I would love to be able to watch it with a fresh perspective.
Yeah,
because I feel like it's way easier to go from that to the manga rather than vice versa.
Yeah.
Yes, totally.
I had the unique opportunity to consume the story for the first time through the live-action adaptation. So I thought it'd be fun to look at the story through all three mediums in which it's been told: the live-action show, the anime, and the manga. So in the last 2 weeks, I've consumed 45 episodes of the anime and 100 chapters of the manga. Actually, since I started working on this video, I've consumed 118 episodes of the anime, but let's just pretend that hasn't happened yet. So today, the big question is, how did One Piece live action do something that I thought was almost impossible? Creating a remarkable live action adaptation that was approachable for non-anime viewers, while tackling the overwhelming challenge of adapting the incredibly goofy and grandiose world of One Piece. If you were to ask me, or many other anime fans, what anime is at the top of the list of shows they think would be difficult to adapt into live action, I think many of us would say One Piece. Because not only is there incredible difficulty in translating what happens in the show into a live action setting, but also there's a huge amount of expectations. One Piece fans love the show and manga, so when you're dealing with an IP that is so loved by the general public, you're working with a double-edged sword. Which leads to an important question for this video. Why do so many adaptations of media fail? Then more importantly, why did Netflix's One Piece live action adaptation do such a good job breaking away from that trend? What did it do so well? So let's start first with that concept of expectations. Whenever you're adapting something, you're working with an already established fan base. However, a necessity of adaptation is making adjustments and changes, meaning you have to navigate making adjustments that both satisfy the old audience while also making sure to embrace the new medium in which you're telling a story. Because at the start of every major adaptation comes the question of what to change and what to keep the same. Recently, my brother pointed me towards a Corridor Crew video where they talked about One Piece's live action adaptation, and I think their argument perfectly encapsulates the exact opposite opinion I have about adaptation.
Here's my only criticism here. It's like, I see a really weird choice of like cinematography and direction and everything like that that screams the opposite of anime at me. Maybe it's following the same like narrative beats as a piece, but like it doesn't have any of that kineticism.
Feeling the story, I'm feeling the effects. I'm not feeling anything anime about this whatsoever. I'm not saying it's bad, it's just not anime. This is what makes anime special to me. And if you're gonna do an adaptation, you're not going to try to match the same intensity of like shot selection and composition. Like, it's a visual medium.
It's something I am very passionate about. You know, Nico and myself have made all these like anime live action videos, these anime rock, paper, scissors videos. So it's like trying to like hone in on the tone and shooting style, and specifically balancing it when you're using real actors.
We've dedicated a good chunk of our professional careers to trying to do live action anime.
I strongly disagree with this perspective. I think consistently when people fail to make successful adaptations, it's because they try too desperately to hold on to things that they think made the original special. While you do need to stay true to the characters and story, too much of what works in anime won't work in a live action setting. If you emulate their original too closely, you will inevitably fail. It's a large part of what makes me dislike those live-action anime videos that Corridor Crew does make. They feel like this bastardized attempt of taking anime trope and transferring it into a medium in which it doesn't work. And maybe with their videos, that's the whole point, to see if they can make it work, but it often feels out of touch, and to me, they miss the mark. But with Netflix, their goal was to make a good adaptation, something approachable for new viewers and those that love the IP. I think it would have been a huge mistake for the Netflix adaptation to emulate too closely anime's kineticism, the term that the Corridor Crew guys called it, because if they were to do so, it would take an already borderline corny story and make it even more exaggerate and hard to consume. And I think this is historically a place where a lot of live-action anime adaptations have failed. Inherent for an adaptation to be worth it, you need the benefits of the new medium you're telling the story in to outweigh the deficit of losing the parts you love from the original medium. This requires a certain degree of change in the story. But one of the problems with making adjustments to a story is it's very easy to lose sight of the core of what makes it special. Forgettable adaptations are no fun to watch, but those that make bad changes to the story are often seen in a terrible light, which is where Eiichiro Oda comes in. The original writer of the manga and the person most largely in control of the project, he was given ultimate veto powers when it came to Netflix's adaptation. This cascaded into all sorts of different aspects of One Piece's live action that worked. This is where we make our first comparison between the manga, anime, and show. When it comes to the casting, I was absolutely blown away, especially in retrospect, because when I first sat down to watch the show, I had very little reference outside of the online representation of the characters I vaguely knew. Luffy was likable and silly and maybe even a bit stupid. Zoro was a badass who used 3 swords, one of which went in his mouth, which for most of my life I thought was ridiculously stupid. But when I actually sat down to watch the live action and saw the group interacting with one another, I was blown away by how well the characters worked together. And this was consistent across all 3 mediums, watching the anime, reading the manga, and watching the live action. But this may be a controversial take. I think the best representation of the characters so far is in the live action. Okay, I know for a lot of people that's going to be a pretty crazy thing to say, but to be fair, you've probably watched more of the anime and read more of the manga. And I think that's going to influence a lot of people's perspectives, because as good as One Piece is, it's really far from perfect, especially in the beginning. I think independent of some of the changes that the live action made to the story that people had issues with, I do think the characters in the live action are definitely better than the anime, and in a lot of ways better than the manga. And I think a big part of that was Oda's ability to look in retrospect. When working on the live action adaptation, he had the benefit of being able to know where everyone ends up after 1,000 episodes, maybe even more. I imagine he has a lot of the story already figured out. So moments that felt clumsier in the anime and manga were condensed and felt a little bit smoother to me in the live action version. Things like introducing Nami and Zoro in conjunction, immediately jumping into character dynamics and banter that took a lot longer for the anime and manga to get to. Something to know about any running series that's lasted as long as One Piece has is that it has to some degree, be discovery written. You can't bullet point out the entire story. Oda had to figure it out as he went. Maybe he knew where the story would go or where it eventually will end, but a large part of his writing had to have been just figuring it out as he goes. But ultimately, what I think the live action did faster than the manga and anime is create characters with depth. And I don't think that's a criticism of the anime and manga. It honestly is pretty easy for me, a 25-year-old adult revisiting a story that was originally written in 1997, to forget the fact that the target audience for this story was children. It's a cartoon. I just preached about how important it is to embrace the medium in which you're telling a story, and embracing the type of story you're trying to tell is as important. In a lot of ways, I prefer the live action. But a big reason for that is because I think I'm more in the target audience for the live action than I am the anime that was originally released in the late 90s. Because the One Piece live action is doing what I think ultimately makes for a good adaptation, walking the fine line between holding on to the things that make the story special while also embracing its new medium. Because while the live action felt true to the story I've read and now consumed in the anime, I think the tone is drastically different. In anime and manga, there's this thing I call magnitude translation loss. When we watch the Looney Tunes and see an anvil fall on one of their heads, it's less concerning than if we were to see an anvil fall on a live-action character's head. The medium in which we consume a piece of media influences our suspension of disbelief. I think that voices itself in the way the characters are written. Luffy's given a little bit more agency in the way he approaches things. He stumbles into things less, but he's still the same character that's so likable in the anime and manga, someone that is kind and compassionate, incredibly rebellious, and values people's passions and dreams above almost anything else. But I'm also working off of a lot of limited information. I think anyone who's caught up on the show might have a completely different perspective than I do. In the anime, I'm coming up on the end of Alabasta, and in the manga, I've only read through Arlong Park. Because if I had to simplify what made this show work into 3 points, I would say first, it embraced the medium and type of story it was trying to tell. Second, it respected that story, working with the original creator, giving him ultimate veto powers, and keeping what they could while letting go of what they couldn't make work. And third, finally, there was just good execution. I enjoyed the costumes, set design, acting, writing, and overall, the product itself. It was far from perfect, but for me, it worked really well. I actually think I could go through episode by episode and find unique, interesting topics to talk about, especially given the fact that I just consumed the exact same story 3 times in a row. Mind you, a story that is infamous for bad pacing, but one also famous for special moments. There's a reason the season ended with Arlong Park. There's a reason for a lot of things. But of all the potential topics, the first thing I realized was that in a sea of failed adaptations, One Piece did more than good. It was great.